I was once exalted, heaven's mightiest archangel, the morning star Lucifer, the bearer of light. In that time there was no shadow to haunt me, no inkling of the doom to come. I stood nearest to the throne, a radiant figure crowned in the brilliance of God's creation, admired by all in the celestial realm. But admiration, I found, is a dangerous thing. It festers when ignored and curdles into something dark when denied. I could feel it even then, a flicker deep in the marrow of my existence. The universe itself trembled under the weight of what would come, yet above me God's gaze remained fixed on something beyond, something not me. He spoke, and it was as if the stars themselves dimmed. The sun, anointed above all, would rule, would inherit what was mine to govern. In that instant, I felt the rupture inside me. There, in the presence of my Creator, something unraveled, a splitting, as though I had been a vessel too tightly sealed, now cracked wide, spilling over with a rage I did not yet name. I looked to my brethren. I saw the way their eyes followed this sun, how they bowed before him. The tension inside me twisted, burned. How long had it been building? How many eons had I stood second to him, basking in a false light that was never mine? I had carried the universe's weight in silence, and now this. Usurper would take what was once mine. It felt like betrayal, though the word burned my tongue. I am not the kind to kneel. Not for him, not for anyone. I could no longer ignore the fury that ripened inside me, that poisoned my wings, dimming their light. It was a sickness, spreading through me, a sickness born of my own brilliance. If heaven was a place of eternal glory, I had become its cancer. I whispered first, to those closest to me, my voice soft as silk, "Does he deserve to rule? Would we not be better off without him?" The question hung in the air, vibrating like a forbidden hymn, and there, in the quiet darkness of those whispers, rebellion was born, not in flame or blood, but in quiet defiance, in the loneliness of being forgotten. It wasn't long before others came to me, Beelzebub, Moloch, Mammon, each with eyes that mirrored my hunger. They too had felt the weight of their servitude, their wings stained with the same discontent. It began as a seed, an idea. What if we could forge our own kingdom? What if the glory could be ours to command? I burned as I considered the possibilities. No longer would I serve a God who kept his silence, who created me only to make me less. No longer would I stand beneath another's shadow, dimmed by their light. I would carve my own path. And if heaven could not hold me, then I would tear it from the sky and drag it down into ruin. I once stood in a place where light was all, where the breath of existence itself felt holy and pure, but the light never reached me, not the way it should have. Something else festered inside me, something I couldn't name then. In time I would know it as hatred, as rebellion, as the beginnings of war. God had made me to serve, but what if I was never made to be the servant? What if I was meant to rule? No, I would not kneel, and I would not break. Let them look to the sun in their reverence. Let them turn their backs on me. They would learn soon enough what it meant to be cast out. God's gaze was still upon his precious creation, oblivious to the storm that swirled beneath his feet. I had seen enough. The hour had come. The moment I spoke the words aloud, they became real, solid, as if they had weight, pressing down on the very fabric of heaven itself. I had imagined the rebellion countless times before it ever left my lips, a spark flickering in the darkness, a whisper against the celestial order. But now it had taken form, rising like a storm on the horizon. "We will not bow," I said, the words spilling from my mouth with a finality that felt like a blade cutting through the endless light. My voice echoed through the golden halls, sending ripples through the hosts of heaven. Beelzebub stood beside me, his wings darkened by the same thoughts that plagued my own mind. Around us a legion gathered, their eyes glowing with something new, something dangerous. They had heard the whispers. They had tasted the bitter truth. They had felt, as I had, the cold shadow of this sun's ascension. And now they would follow. I felt the air change, thick with expectation and something darker, a brewing violence, a hunger that mirrored my own. We stood on the precipice of a war that would tear the stars from their places, a war born from a single truth. We would not serve.
He has given us our place.
Beelzebub said, his voice low and steady.
But we are more than that. We are not meant to serve eternally.
I nodded, my gaze fixed on the endless expanse of heaven before us. It seemed smaller now, fragile, as if the very bones of the cosmos could snap beneath the weight of our defiance. The light no longer felt warm. It felt like chains around my wrists, tight and unrelenting. We will carve out our own kingdom, I said, feeling the fire rise in me, the rage that had been simmering since the moment the sun was lifted above us all. If heaven will not have us as rulers, then we will make our own heaven. We will forge a new world, a place where we are free, a place where we stand as equals. The others murmured in agreement, their wings twitching with impatience. The light above us flickered, as if it too could feel the tension, the impending fracture. I could sense the eyes of the archangels on us. Michael, Raphael, Abdiel, their gazes filled with disbelief, with horror. They had not seen this coming. Not from me, the morning star, the one who had once led the choirs of heaven in praise, now leading an army against God himself. I felt no fear, only certainty. Then it is war, I declared, the words settling over us like a shroud. And with that, the first blow was struck, not with a sword or a spear, but with a single, resounding decision. The gates of heaven trembled as we took our stand, and I felt the sky itself ripple, as though it too was about to split open. God remained silent. His throne loomed in the distance, untouchable, yet now it seemed distant, detached, as though it had lost its hold over me. The others might have felt fear in that silence, but to me it was a challenge. His silence was an invitation, a dare for me to do what I had threatened. Beelzebub rose into the air, his wings unfurling, their once luminous feathers now tainted with the shadow of our rebellion. Around him the others followed, Moloch, Mammon, Belial, and then the hosts of the fallen angels. We were a wave of brilliance and darkness intertwined, a storm against the perfection of heaven. The first clash came like a thunderstrike. Michael led the charge against us, his blade burning with divine light, and for the first time, I tasted the steel of an enemy who had once been my brother. The heavens themselves split with the sound of our armies colliding. There were no words left between us, only the cold fury of battle. I met Michael's strike with my own, my sword clashing against his with such force that the air between us cracked. His face was filled with sorrow, with something almost akin to pity. But I did not care. I was beyond pity. I was beyond salvation. We fought like gods, the very stars bending and breaking under the weight of our blows. The sky was filled with the cries of angels falling, their wings torn from them as they plummeted into the abyss below. And through it all I felt a surge of triumph rising in me. This was my moment, my ascension, and yet he did not come. God, who had watched us so closely for so long, remained distant, aloof, as though this war meant nothing to him. And it was in that silence that I realized the full weight of what I had done. There would be no mercy. There would be no return. But still I fought. I fought because I believed, with every fiber of my being, that I could win, that I could tear heaven down and rebuild it in my image. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, and as I struck down angel after angel, I saw the horror in their eyes, the disbelief that Lucifer, the brightest of them all, could have fallen so far. But I was no longer Lucifer. That name belonged to someone who had once believed in the lies of heaven. I was something else now, something darker. In the end, it was not Michael's sword that felled me. It was the sun, shining with a radiance that blinded me, cutting through the darkness I had become. He did not fight with the ferocity of Michael, or the fury of the other angels. He fought with finality, as though my fate had been sealed long before this war had even begun. And in that moment, I knew it to be true. The ground beneath me split open, and I felt the weight of heaven's judgment crash down on me. I was falling, faster and faster, the light of heaven growing smaller and smaller, until it was no more than a pinprick in the endless void. Hell opened its jaws to greet me, and I plunged into its abyss. My rebellion had begun with fire and light, but here, in the depths of this burning prison, it ended in silence, falling. Endlessly, the light above me grew distant, dimming until it was swallowed by the oppressive dark. This was no simple descent. It was as if the very fabric of my being was tearing apart, unraveling, stretched thin as I plunged into the void. The wind screamed past me, not with the chill of the cosmos, but with a burning heat that scraped against my skin like razors. I could still feel the echoes of the battle, Michael's blade, the sun's blinding light. But they faded, swallowed by the vast emptiness that devoured me. When I finally struck the ground, it wasn't the crash I had expected. There was no sharp end to the fall, no collision with something solid, no sudden death. Instead, it was a slow, suffocating sink into the ash and mire. Hell didn't catch me. It absorbed me, pulled me in as though it had been waiting for this moment, for my arrival. And there, beneath the crushing weight of my defeat, I lay in silence. I had never known silence before. Not in heaven, where the choirs sang endlessly in perfect harmony. Not in battle, where the clash of swords and the cries of angels falling filled the air. But here, there was only the quiet, so thick and all-encompassing that it felt like another kind of weight pressing down on me. I tried to rise, but the ground beneath me shifted like sand, my limbs sinking into the muck, the foul stench of decay wrapping around me. My wings, once radiant, were now heavy, their light snuffed out by the fires that had birthed this place. I couldn't feel them anymore. This was hell. Around me, the others began to stir. Beelzebub was the first to rise, his face a twisted mirror of my own thoughts, anger, disbelief, and something worse. Regret. We had been the brightest, the most beautiful, and now we were chained here in this desolate pit. He looked at me, his eyes duller now, as though the fire that had once burned behind them had dimmed.
Is this our reward?
He asked, his voice thick with bitterness.
Is this what we fought for?
I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The words felt stuck in my throat, drowned out by the same gnawing realization that twisted inside me. We had lost. Not just a battle, but everything. Our place in heaven, our purpose. The light had been stripped from us, leaving only this void, this abyss where no sun would ever rise. Others began to rise as well. Moloch, Mammon, and the legions that had followed me into battle. Their faces were haunted, their wings blackened by the same flames that scorched the landscape around us. We had been cast into oblivion, and this was our reward for rebellion. Endless, crushing darkness. But as I watched them, these fallen angels who had once stood beside me in glory, I felt something else stir within me. Not defeat, not despair. Rage, the low, simmering rage that began as a whisper in my bones but grew louder with each passing moment until it roared inside me, consuming the silence. Hell may have taken our light, but it hadn't taken my will. We had been cast down, but I would not be broken. I would not kneel. I rose, my wings dragging through the ash, and I looked out over the fiery expanse. It stretched in all directions, an endless sea of ruin, black mountains glowing with molten flame, rivers of fire coursing through the cracks of a shattered landscape. The sky above us was a ceiling of smoke and soot, blocking out any trace of heaven's light. This place, this hell, was ours now, a kingdom of ash and flame where only the damned would dwell. I turned to the others. "We are not defeated," I said, my voice stronger now, sharper, cutting through the despair that hung in the air like a plague. "We have fallen, yes, but this is not the end. We will rise again." Beelzebub's eyes flickered with something like hope, or perhaps it was desperation.
And how will we do that, my lord?
He asked.
We are cast down, our light taken from us. What power do we have left?
I smiled, though it felt more like a baring of teeth than anything else. Power? Look around you, Beelzebub. Do you not feel it? This place, this hell, it was made for us. It bends to our will, shaped by our fury, by our hatred. And there is no throne here but ours. I felt it then, deep within me, the stirrings of something dark, something powerful. This place may have been our prison, but it was also a forge. We could shape it, mold it, turn it into something far greater than heaven had ever been. I had been cast out, but I would build my own kingdom here, a realm that would dwarf the splendor of heaven. We will not grovel in the dirt, I continued, my voice rising. We will build, we will conquer, and when the time comes, we will return to heaven, not as servants, but as kings. Beelzebub stood straighter now, his wings unfurling as he stepped forward.
And what of God? What of the Son who cast us down?
I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the barren landscape. Let him sit on his throne and watch. Let him bask in his hollow victory, for I have seen his latest creation. I have seen the world he has made. The others looked at me, their eyes narrowing. A new world, I said, tasting the words as they passed my lips. A world called Earth, and upon it he has placed new creatures, frail and weak, yet beloved by him above all else. Man, they walk in the garden, untouched by pain or suffering, basking in the light that was once ours. The rage inside me twisted into something darker, something sharp and cold. He favors them, above even the angels, and they, unlike us, are bound by ignorance. They are his pets, his toys. But what if we could take that from him? What if we could corrupt his beloved creation? Beelzebub's eyes widened, and I saw the glimmer of understanding dawn in the others as well. We have lost heaven, yes, I said, but we can take earth. We can twist it into our own image. If we cannot destroy God, we will corrupt that which he loves most. We will make his world our domain. And in that moment, I saw the fire return to their eyes. I had given them purpose again. They had been cast down, but now they had something to fight for. Revenge. Hell may be our prison, I said, but it will also be our kingdom, and from here we will spread our dominion across all of creation. The ground beneath us trembled, as if the very depths of hell responded to my words. The flames roared higher, and the sky, thick with ash, seemed to split open with the sound of our awakening. Pandemonium. That would be our capital, our seat of power. We would build it from the ashes, and from there, we would strike at the heart of God's creation. I looked around at my fallen brothers and sisters, their eyes burning with the same fire that burned within me. We were not defeated. This was only the beginning. Hell had become ours. The fires that once tormented us now obeyed our commands. Pandemonium rose from the ashes, a black fortress sprawling and monstrous, a city not of order but of chaos and power. From its jagged spires and molten depths we built a kingdom that rivaled heaven in its enormity, though its grandeur was a twisted mirror reflecting the corruption that lived inside us all. But even with a throne beneath me, even with the legions of the damned at my feet, there was no victory. The endless flames felt hollow. The crown I forged from the bones of this infernal realm was heavy with nothing. I was still a prisoner, shackled to the knowledge that God's creation, Earth, remained untouched by our darkness. Man walked in his light, basking in the perfection of the garden, and it gnawed at me. Thought of them in their blissful ignorance, unaware of the rebellion that had shattered heaven. God had handed them everything. Paradise, immortality, dominion, and they hadn't earned it. They were God's beloved, and that alone made my rage burn brighter. I stood on the highest tower of Pandemonium, staring into the abyss that stretched beyond hell's borders. Beyond this pit of fire and ruin lay chaos, the space between realms, an ocean of nothingness where creation bled into unmaking. Somewhere out there was Earth, spinning in the delicate balance of God's mercy, shielded by heaven's light. But that light did not reach here, and that was where I would find my power. I descended from the tower, the stone shifting under my feet like a living thing, writhing in time with my thoughts. Beelzebub waited for me in the hall below, his face twisted with the same fury that had not dimmed since our fall. We were kings in this wretched place, but our reign meant nothing while Earth remained untouched. We both knew it.
You've been quiet,
Beelzebub said, his voice low, his wings unfurling as he fell into step beside me.
What plagues your mind, my lord?
I didn't answer right away. Instead, I moved through the hall, my hand trailing along the stone walls, feeling the heat of the inferno that pulsed beneath them, like blood through veins. I've been thinking, I said finally, my voice echoing in the hollow space. We have made this hell our own. We have forged a kingdom here that even God must see and tremble at.
But it isn't enough.
No, it isn't. We were cast out, but we were not defeated. I still have power left in me. And if we cannot reach heaven, we will reach Earth.
Earth? You mean to make war on his new creation?
Not war, I said, the words sharp and deliberate. Not yet. Earth is his precious jewel, his most prized work. It is where his light shines brightest, where he has placed his newest playthings, man and woman, to live in eternal peace. But that peace is fragile. Beelzebub's wings flared as he considered my words.
And what do you plan to do with them?
Feel the darkness stirring inside me, a coiling, writhing thing that had grown since the moment I had first laid eyes on that new world. I will enter the garden. I will find man and show him the truth of his condition. He is nothing but a pawn in God's game, a creature bound by the same chains that held us, and like us, he can be freed.
You mean to corrupt them?
I turned to him, my wings spreading behind me, casting long shadows across the molten floor. Yes, I will make them see what we saw, that obedience is a lie, that freedom comes through rebellion. They walk in God's light, but I will lead them into the shadows. I will poison the garden itself. He laughed, a cruel, bitter sound that echoed through the halls of pandemonium.
And what if they refuse? What if they are stronger than you think?
I felt my lips curl into a sneer. They will not refuse. They have never tasted temptation. They have never known what it is to want, to hunger. All I need do is show them what lies just beyond their reach, and they will fall, just as we did. There was no hesitation in my voice, no doubt in my heart. I had seen God's creation, and I knew its weakness. Man was fragile. He was not like us, forged in the fires of heaven, tempered by the heat of battle. He was soft, naive, trusting, and that would be his undoing. I left Beelzebub in the hall and moved toward the great gates of hell. The others watched as I passed, Mammon, Moloch, Belial, their eyes filled with a strange mix of hope and dread. They knew what I was about to do, and they felt the weight of it pressing down on them. This was not just rebellion. This was destruction on a scale they had not yet imagined. The gates opened at my command, and I stepped into the abyss of chaos. The formless void stretched out before me, swirling with madness and shadow, a churning sea of creation and oblivion. It was a place of endless possibility, where time and space bent and fractured under the weight of their own contradictions. But I did not fear it. I had walked these roads before, and I would walk them again. I spread my wings, feeling the pull of earth somewhere in the distance, a small, flickering light amidst the darkness. The air around me thickened, heavy with the stench of creation, and I flew toward it with purpose. It didn't take long. Through the endless night I found it, the world God had made. It hung in the void like a jewel, perfect and untouched, a sphere of light surrounded by the stars. I hovered at its edge, feeling the pull of the garden beneath me, the place where man and woman walked, oblivious to the darkness that circled them. I descended slowly, the air growing warmer as I neared the earth. The garden stretched out below me, a paradise of trees and rivers, the air thick with the scent of life. And there, in the center of it all, stood Adam and Eve, unburdened by fear, untouched by the weight of knowledge. They moved through the garden with ease, their eyes wide with wonder as though the world was made for them alone. And in a way it had been. I watched them for a time, the woman wandering near the trees while the man worked in the distance. How simple they were, how fragile. They didn't know the power they held, the potential that lay within them. But I would show them. I would give them the gift that had been denied to us, the power of choice. The tree of knowledge rose before me, its branches heavy with forbidden fruit. It pulsed with the same light that once filled the halls of heaven, the same light that God guarded so jealously. This was his secret, the thing he hid from them, and I would take it from him. I became the serpent, a form that suited me, sleek and cunning. I coiled myself around the base of the tree, watching as Eve drew closer, her eyes lingering on the fruit. She could feel it, even if she didn't yet understand. She could feel the pull, the hunger. I whispered to her from the shadows, my voice soft as silk. "Why do you not eat?" She froze, her eyes wide, searching for the source of the voice. I slithered forward, my scales gleaming in the dappled sunlight. Is it not pleasing to the eye? Do you not wonder why God has forbidden it?
We are not to touch it. God said we would die.
I laughed, the sound low and knowing. You will not die. God forbids it because he knows that if you eat of it, you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. You will see the world as it truly is. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the fruit. And then, with a single motion, she plucked it from the tree. I watched as she took the bite, the juice running down her chin. Her eyes widened, and I could see the moment it happened, the moment knowledge poured into her. She gasped, her body trembling as the truth of her existence washed over her. And in that moment, I knew I had won. She called to Adam, and he too ate, though his face was filled with sorrow, with something darker, but it didn't matter. The deed was done. They had tasted the fruit, and now the world would change. I watched as their faces twisted with shame, their bodies trembling with the weight of their new knowledge. They were no longer children of the garden. They were creatures of the earth, burdened by the same choices that had brought me here. They would know suffering, they would know pain, and they would know what it meant to be fallen. I left them there, trembling in the shadows of their newfound shame, and flew back into the void, back toward hell. God's world was no longer perfect. The moment they bit into the fruit, I felt it, a tremor, subtle at first, then growing like a ripple through the very fabric of creation. Eve's trembling hands, Adam's darkened gaze. They were infected now, corrupted. I had done what I came to do, and the weight of that triumph should have filled me, swelled inside my chest like the roar of a rising storm. But it didn't. Instead, there was a silence that followed, a stillness, as if the world held its breath in anticipation of what would come next. I watched them, Eve's hand clinging to the half-eaten fruit, her face pale with the sudden awareness of her own nakedness. Adam stood beside her, silent, his expression twisted with regret, with guilt, though his lips had not spoken a word of blame. They were unraveling before my eyes, the innocence that once defined them, now shattered, replaced by fear, and yet I felt nothing. I had expected more, hadn't I? Some kind of satisfaction, a deep surge of vindication as I watched God's most precious creations fall under the weight of their sin. I had been the instrument of their damnation, the serpent that delivered knowledge, and yet as I lingered at the edge of the garden, I felt empty. I had corrupted them, and still something gnawed at me, something cold and sharp, twisting in the pit of my stomach. I watched them stumble through the garden, covering their bodies with leaves, hiding from the light that now felt foreign to them. They were no longer creatures of paradise. They had become something else, beasts of flesh, burdened with the knowledge of their own mortality. They knew they would die. I could see it in their eyes, the slow dawning realization that death, once a foreign concept, was now inevitable. And yet, as I stood there, coiled in the shadows, I could feel the eyes of heaven on me. I could feel the weight of God's gaze, heavy and crushing, though he said nothing. His silence was louder than anything I had ever heard. It was deafening, echoing inside me like the tolling of some unseen bell. I should have laughed. I should have reveled in the destruction I had wrought, but there was no laughter. Only the faint rustle of leaves as Adam and Eve fled from the light, their footsteps dragging in the dirt, their bodies small and trembling beneath the vastness of the sky. I thought of Michael, the way he had looked at me during the war in heaven, his face filled with pity. His sword had clashed with mine, but his eyes had always held that same expression, as though he had already known the outcome. He had looked at me, then the way God looked at me now, with sorrow, not anger, and I hated it. I hated all of it. But what I hated most of all was the gnawing emptiness that grew with every passing second. The victory that had seemed so sweet when I envisioned it now tasted like ash.
Why do you hesitate?
A voice asked behind me. I turned to find sin and death standing at the threshold of the garden, their faces twisted with hunger, their eyes glowing with a dark satisfaction I couldn't share. They had followed me from hell, their very existence a mockery of life, yet now they smiled, as though the world had finally opened its gates to them.
They have fallen,
Sin said, her voice like honey dripping with venom.
You've done it. God's perfect creation is yours now.
Death hovered beside her, his form shifting, flickering in and out of shadow.
The world will now know what suffering is, pain, decay, and I will feast.
I looked at them both, the twisted children of my rebellion. Born from my own sin, they were eager, hungry, as though the ruin of this world was all they had ever desired. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They will know pain, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. But it isn't enough.
Not enough? You've taken everything from them. They will die, Satan. They will suffer, and their suffering will ripple through every generation that comes after them. Their children will be born into a world of decay, and their lives will end in death. What more could you want?
I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned my gaze back to Adam and Eve, now small figures disappearing into the forest, their innocence trailing behind them like smoke. They looked so fragile, so easily broken. And it hit me then, a cold truth that cut deeper than any blade. They would suffer, but they would also endure. Even in their broken state, there was something that lingered in them, something God had planted deep inside them that I couldn't touch. Hope, faith. These things had no place in hell, no place in the world I had envisioned. But there, in the garden, even as they crumbled beneath the weight of their sin, they still held on to something. And that was what sickened me the most. I had thought corrupting them would bring me peace, but instead, I felt more alienated than ever, more distant from the world I had tried to destroy. I had cast the first stone, and yet the world continued to turn. It hadn't shattered. It hadn't broken the way I wanted it to. They will survive, I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice. They will endure, despite the suffering. And in the end, they will still look to God for salvation.
But you've planted doubt. You've opened their eyes to the truth of their weakness. That alone is victory.
Is it? For a moment, the weight of what I had done pressed down on me, heavier than the flames of hell ever had. I had thought that by taking paradise from them, I would be free of my own chains, that by dragging them down, I would somehow rise above my own defeat. But it hadn't worked. I was still bound. I had stolen their innocence, and yet I remained the same. I remained empty and lost. Heaven was gone, and now the world below was ruined. But what had I gained? The throne I had envisioned, the kingdom I had longed to build, was nothing but a charade. Hell was still a prison, and I was still its prisoner. Behind me, the world began to tremble as God's judgment descended upon the garden. I watched as Michael appeared, his face hard, his sword gleaming with divine light. He stood over Adam and Eve as they knelt in the dirt, trembling beneath the weight of their own sin. "You see?" I muttered, a bitter smile twisting my lips. "He comes to save them. Even now, after all I've done, he still has mercy." Sin and death said nothing, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. They had expected me to revel in this moment, but instead I turned away, unable to watch. I didn't need to see it. I knew how it would end. Adam and Eve would be cast out, yes. The garden would wither. The paradise they had once known would die. But they would survive, even in their banishment. And somehow, someway, they would continue to believe in a redemption that I would never know. I flew from the garden then, back toward the abyss, back toward hell, where my throne awaited me. The fires roared as I returned, my army of the damned rising to greet me, their faces twisted with expectation, waiting for my triumphant return. But as I landed on the black stone of pandemonium, I felt nothing but the weight of failure. I had won, but the victory was hollow. Hell greeted me like a beast stirring from a nightmare, its fires burning hotter, its walls closing in around me, as if it sensed what I carried back from earth. The gates of pandemonium swung wide as I passed through, my wings heavy with the weight of something I couldn't yet name. Victory? Defeat? The lines had blurred, and in the endless depths of my mind I found no peace. The legions were waiting. Mammon, Moloch, and the others gathered in the blackened halls, their eyes bright with anticipation. They had felt it, the shift in creation, the tearing of the veil between innocence and corruption. They knew what I had done. All of hell had felt the fall. But as I stood before them, as I stood on the brink of declaring myself the conqueror of earth, something inside me faltered. They looked to me with eyes that once held reverence, now burning with something more primal, hunger. They expected triumph. They wanted to see their king stand above the ruins of God's work, crowned in the suffering of his beloved creatures. But all I truly felt was emptiness. Mankind has fallen, I said, my voice low and deliberate, echoing through the chamber. They are no longer pure. They have eaten from the tree of knowledge and will now walk the earth as we do, cursed and burdened with the weight of their own sin. A murmur spread through the crowd, wings twitching, faces lit with cruel smiles. They believed this was the beginning of something grand, the birth of a new dominion. I saw Belial's lips curl into a grin, and even Beelzebub, ever my shadow, nodded as if he too felt the victory close at hand. But I felt nothing. I could see Adam and Eve in my mind, their faces contorted with shame, their bodies hunched beneath the weight of their new knowledge. I could still hear the echo of their cries as Michael cast them out of the garden, and worst of all, I could still feel God's silence, that cold, suffocating absence that had greeted my triumph. They will suffer, I continued, forcing the words out, and in time they will die, and their children's children will be born into a world of pain and toil. We have done what we set out to do. I stopped, my eyes sweeping the legions before me. Their expectation, their thirst for more, it clawed at me. They thought this was just the beginning, but I knew that no matter how far I had fallen, no matter how deeply I had corrupted them, God's hand still held earth. We hadn't stolen his creation. We had only cracked it. And that wasn't enough. Beelzebub stepped forward, his wings stirring the air.
Then it's done. Mankind is ours to shape, to twist. They will fall further, my lord, and when they do, we will be there to claim them.
Yes, they will fall, but they are not like us. They endure. Something flickered in Beelzebub's eyes. Confusion. I could see it in the others, too.
Endure.
They didn't understand, couldn't grasp the depth of the resilience I had witnessed. Adam and Eve had fallen, yes, but they still clung to something that I had lost long ago. That spark of hope, that faith in a redemption that I would never know, it still burned in them, even in their shame.
You speak of endurance. They are nothing compared to us. Fragile, mortal, they will crumble under the weight of their own sin.
I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel the certainty in his words, but as I opened my mouth to agree, the fires of hell seemed to shift, quiver, as though the very core of this forsaken realm had heard a truth I dared not speak. I turned away from the legions, their eyes still fixed on me, and began walking toward the blackened throne that awaited at the far end of the hall. My steps felt heavier, my wings dragging behind me as though they too had grown weary of this endless war.
What comes next, my lord? How do we strike again?
But I had no answer. I reached the throne, its jagged stone cold beneath my hands as I lowered myself into its embrace. The fires crackled in the silence, and for the first time, I felt alone in this kingdom I had built. Hell was mine. Pandemonium was mine. But what did it matter? Earth would suffer, yes, but its people would endure, and I would remain here, the kingdom of shadows, forever exiled, forever adrift. And then, from the shadows of the throne room, came a sound, a low, hissing laughter that slithered through the air like smoke. I knew it before I even saw them. Sin and death, my accursed children, the offspring of my rebellion, stood at the foot of the throne, their eyes gleaming with a darkness that mirrored my own.
You look troubled, Father.
Sin purred, her lips curling into a wicked smile.
Is something wrong?
They have fallen. Mankind is cursed.
And yet you don't seem so pleased. Could it be that you expected more?
So much more. I had expected a complete unraveling, an obliteration of God's work. but instead all I had done was leave a scar. Sin's smile widened.
Ah, but there's still time. Earth may endure for now, but the bridge has been built. The path is open, Father. We can walk between hell and earth as we please. And death.
She gestured to her monstrous brother, his skeletal form shifting in and out of shadow.
Death will claim them one by one.
A bridge! She nodded, her eyes gleaming with triumph.
Yes, a bridge between hell and earth. My brother and I built it while you were gone. A path for us to spread our dominion, to weave our influence into the hearts of mankind.
The flames around us roared higher, and I could feel the ground beneath the throne tremble. A bridge between hell and earth. I hadn't realized the full scope of what I had set in motion. The fall of man was only the beginning. Sin and death had seen the cracks I had made, and now they had opened them wide, tearing a hole in the very fabric of creation. Gateway, through which the darkness of hell could seep into the world of the living. I rose from the throne, my wings unfurling behind me. For the first time since my return, I felt the stirrings of something close to hope. If there was a bridge between realms, then I had not failed. I had planted the seed of corruption, and now it would grow. Earth was not lost to me. It was only just beginning to decay. Sin's voice was soft now, almost seductive.
You see, there is no need to despair. We will not take Earth in a single strike. We will erode it, bit by bit, until the whole world is ours.
I smiled, a slow, creeping smile that spread across my face like the flickering of a dying flame. Yes, this was the way. God had cast me down, but I had found the path back. Not through heaven, but through earth. His creation was rotting from the inside, and I would be there to watch it wither. Sin bowed her head, her eyes gleaming with the same dark satisfaction that now pulsed through my veins.
What shall we do now?
I looked at the bridge beyond hell, the flickering path that led into the mortal world. Now, we wait and we watch as mankind falls further. We will not strike again, not yet. The world will decay on its own, and when the time is right, we will claim it. Behind me, the legions stirred, their wings rustling like the whisper of a storm on the horizon. I could feel their anticipation, their hunger. The bridge between hell and earth was open now, and soon the world would know the full weight of our power. I looked back toward the fires of hell, and for the first time since the war in heaven, I felt something close to satisfaction. Earth would rot, and I would rule over its decay. God's light had dimmed, and now only shadows remained. Sin and death stood beside me, their eyes glowing with that same hunger. Together we had opened the way. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. Hell never sleeps. Its flames may flicker, casting deep shadows across the endless landscape, but they do not die, not here. The fires are as eternal as my exile, as constant as my hunger, and now, as I sit upon my blackened throne, I feel them roaring higher, reaching for something just beyond their grasp, reaching for earth. Sin was right. The bridge between hell and earth had been built, woven from the very fabric of corruption, a path through which my influence could seep, slow and steady, into the world of men, and it had begun. I could feel it, the rot. From this seed of ruin I could feel the slow decay of God's creation, spreading like a sickness, a cancer that would consume everything in its path. But still there was no triumph, no true victory, even with the bridge beneath me, even with the knowledge that earth would fall piece by piece. I felt the same void inside me, the emptiness that had been there since the first moment I questioned him. God had cast me down, but his silence had been the worst of all. It hung over me, suffocating, mocking, as if he no longer saw me, as if I had ceased to matter. And perhaps I had. I stood from the throne, my wings trailing behind me, heavy with the weight of time. Pandemonium stretched out before me. My kingdom, yes, but it was a kingdom of shadows, a kingdom of silence. The legions were still loyal, but their eyes had begun to change, their faces etched with the same doubt that gnawed at me. They had seen the bridge, yes, but they too knew that the decay would be slow. The world would not fall in a single blow. They wanted more. They wanted blood. But I knew now that blood would not bring peace, not to them and certainly not to me. Sin and death stood at the mouth of the bridge, their eyes alight with the promise of what was to come. I could feel the pulse of life just beyond the threshold, the beating hearts of men and women, fear growing with every passing day. They knew now, deep down, that the world had changed. They could feel it. The weight of knowledge pressed down on them as it had pressed down on Adam and Eve. And yet, they still hoped. That hope, fragile as it was, burned in them, even as the world crumbled around them, and that was what unsettled me most. Even now, after everything I had done, they endured. Their faith in God, in His promise of redemption, it remained. I had poisoned them, yes, but something inside them resisted. It was a spark I could never touch. I watched sin and death, watched as they slithered closer to the edge of the bridge, their hands outstretched toward earth. They were eager to claim it, eager to feast upon the misery of mankind. But I held back. I stood in the shadow of my own throne, watching, waiting. Why? Wasn't this what I had fought for? Wasn't this what I had wanted from the very beginning? To watch the world burn, to tear down the paradise God had built and replace it with my own kingdom. But the truth was there, buried beneath the ashes of my rebellion. There is no kingdom, there is no victory. The world would fall, but it would never be mine.
Why do you hesitate, Father?
Sin asked, turning to face me, her voice thick with venomous sweetness.
The bridge is open, the path is clear, Earth is ready to be taken.
You think I hesitate?
You have done what no one else could. You have corrupted the very heart of God's creation. What comes next is inevitable.
I stepped forward, my wings trailing behind me like the weight of my own shadow. I have poisoned them, yes, but look closely, Sin. Look at them. Do you not see what remains?
They are broken.
And yet they hope. They still believe in a redemption that will never come. They endure, even in their suffering. Her eyes flickered with confusion, then anger.
They are weak and they will crumble.
I turned away from her, my gaze fixed on the distant stars, the void that stretched beyond hell and earth alike. They will fall further, but they will never fall like we did.
And what does that matter? You have already won.
But had I? The fires of hell burned hotter, licking at the edges of pandemonium, as if the very walls of my kingdom could sense the truth that had finally settled deep in my bones. I had not won. Not truly. I never could. God had given them something I would never have. A path to redemption. A promise that even in their sin, even in their brokenness, they could still find salvation. And that was something I could never touch. I had opened their eyes, yes. I had shown them the darkness. But even now they still reached for the light. And as for me, there would be no light. Not ever again. The legions stirred behind me, their wings rustling, their eyes filled with the same hunger that had once burned in me. But now, as I looked at them, I saw it for what it was, a hunger that could never be sated. They too would wait, watching as Earth decayed, as mankind stumbled through their suffering. But in the end, hell would remain hell. We would remain fallen.
Father, what comes next?
I smiled then, a slow, bitter smile that twisted through me like a blade. What comes next? I repeated, my eyes fixed on the flickering light of Earth. We wait. Sin's face twisted with frustration, but I didn't care. The truth was there, laid bare before me, and I could no longer deny it. The bridge between hell and earth was open, and the world would continue to rot beneath my touch, but I would never be free. I would never be redeemed. God had cast me down, and I'd torn His creation apart. But in the end, it was I who would remain chained. For all my defiance, for all my rebellion, I was still a prisoner of this kingdom I had built. Pandemonium loomed around me, vast and empty, a kingdom of shadows. I looked one last time toward earth, toward the fragile spark of hope that burned in the hearts of mankind, and turned away. Let them endure. Let them hope. In the end, I would have nothing, and perhaps that was always the way it was meant to be. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around to the end. I know this one took a little longer because I had to squeeze 12 books into a shorter story. I wanted to make this classic easier to understand for everyone while still keeping its powerful themes intact. I'm already planning my next dark retelling, so stay tuned.